When the guards came to get them to throw them into the fiery furnace, there had to have been a scribe near the front door, because they stopped them and said, "What do you have on?" And every article was recorded. Now, if you're going to destroy something in fire, are you going to worry about taking inventory before you throw it in? No. But God directed them to take inventory. Why? Because last night we learned clothing represents character. And their characters perfectly, fully reflected whose character? God's character. And because of that, Jesus decided to come and join them. If they had not been fully dressed, it wouldn't have happened. So this is a very, very important step in that story. And then Isaiah, God got involved in his situation, the birth of Christ, of course. He sent his own son down here. Stephen being stoned. God was there. In fact, he opened up Stephen's eyes and he looked right into heaven. So he was quite involved. And then Hiram Edson. I don't know if there will be enough time tonight or if you even have a desire to see the movie Meet Hiram Edson. But if you do, it's 30 minutes long. It's not a long movie. But Hiram, a very farmer up in New York, and God tapped him on the shoulder and pointed him to the heavenly sanctuary. God became involved in human history. And then the Civil War, beginning with the first battle of Manassas. God was involved. Looking back at that event, we read about it in the book, The Great Controversy, and also in volume 1 of the Testimonies to the Church, 266. Let me read it to you, because many folks don't even know about it. On July 21, 1861, the first major battle of the American Civil War, known in the North as the First Battle of Bull Run, and in the South as the Battle of First Manassas. Just then, an angel descended and waved his hand backward. Instantly, there was confusion in the ranks. It appeared to the northern men that their troops were retreating, when it was not so in reality. And a precipitate retreat commenced. Then it was explained that God had this nation in his own hand and would not suffer victories to be gained faster than he ordained, and would permit no more losses to the northern men than in his wisdom he saw fit to punish them for their sins. God got really involved in Civil War. And history records more, including a snowstorm in the Alps. Oh, I love this story. And God wanted to get the news of 1844 from Mainz, Germany, all around the globe. Maybe I'll quickly tell you. It's an exciting story. Back in the days of Jesus, who was ruling the world? Who was the world power? Rome. And Rome wanted to protect its property. And its property went way up north from Italy, east and west. So Rome sent a contingency of soldiers up north to where the Main River and the Rhine River come together. Do you know what country I'm talking about now? Germany. And they built an outpost. And there they were protecting. This was in 36 BC. What does BC stand for?
Before Christ.
Before Christ. They had this town. That town still stands today. It's a metropolis. And in that town, a famous man was born. He was an aristocrat, but he wasn't rich. And he wasn't thinking about making world records. His work was very humble. Does anyone know the name of the man?
Gutenberg?
Huh?
Gutenberg?
Gutenberg, that's right. And Gutenberg had this little family press in Mainz, Germany. And he was printing three things. Tabloids, which we know as newspapers today, legal documents, and he was working on something that made his name famous. Well, the Bible. The Bible. Now, he never did finish that Bible, by the way. Another man did. But as he's going along, he ran out of money. So he went to a friend of his, Johann Faust. And he says, "Friend, I need a little money. Can you loan me some?" And his friend said, "Sure. What do you need?" And he took what he needed and went on his way. Now, Johann Faust was a very greedy man. And as he thought about what he had just done, and as the days went by, that thought grew and grew. If I was doing that, I would be rich and famous. One day, his thoughts took over his actions. He says, "I'm going to get that printing press, that shop." In order to do that, he had to get the court date moved forward because Gutenberg was getting close to finishing his Bible. The other thing he had to do is lie about the amount of money that Gutenberg actually bought. So he began to work with his pencil. My mother always taught me the man who has the pencil wins the game. Well, he began to play with his pencil and he multiplied things, and finally he went in. The third thing he had to do was buy off the judge. We think that's something new nowadays. It's not good. He accomplished all of them, and he won the lawsuit against Faust. Now, or against Gutenberg. So now Mr. Faust is the owner of the print shop, and he carries on the work. In fact, some theologians believe that Martin Luther had them print 95 theses that he published on the door with him. So anyway, the shop is going along, but because Rome was in charge, they had a bishop who ruled over areas, different areas and different bishops. The Bishop of Mainz died unexpectedly, and the assistant bishop took over. When he took over, it wasn't long until he got a letter from Rome. And Rome said, "We're going to send a replacement for the bishop. Give him the keys when he arrives. And so the assistant bishop begins to think, I don't want to give up this job. I mean, I love having my toes kissed and people bowing before me and all this authority and power. So he writes a letter back to Rome and he says, forget it. I'm in charge. I'll keep things going in good order. Well, he was to learn what we know today, and that is Rome never takes no for an answer. So they write back and they said, if you do not relinquish, we're going to send an army up there and we're going to lay siege to Mainz, Germany. Well, that changed the perspective. Now it's his skin for his job. And he wasn't willing to give up his skin. So he sits down and writes a letter. Okay, send him up. I will do what you ask. He got a courier, and the courier picked up the letter and headed for Rome. Everything was going fine until he got deep in the Alps, and God sent a snowstorm. And the courier was locked in, couldn't go. So therefore, the answer never got to Rome. And Rome took the silence as a no answer, and they sent an army up to Mainz, Germany. When the army came in, they lined up 800 men in the town square and banished them from Mainz, Germany. Among the 800 are printers, apprentice printers. And so they go out. And we read the result of that in Great Controversy, a chapter on a man, Dr. Joseph Wolf, missionary to the world. And it talks about his experience down in Bokhara, Yemen. And he says they have a book called Sirah, and it gives notice of great events. They look for the Lord to come about the year 1840. Where did they get a book? One of those printers ended up somewhere near them. That's how they got the book. History records that 50 countries around the world received their printing trade directly from Gutenberg's press. And the United States is one of them. In 1639, in a little town in Massachusetts called Cambridge, you may recognize the name, they heard that there was one of his presses sitting idle over in England, and they sent a group of people to get it. And that's how we got our printing trade right here. And so God had to allow this snowstorm in order to get the message out to the world. What is that statement? God has 1,000 ways, of which we know what? Nothing. So we're going to go back now to the days of Daniel, who had a question on his mind. He had been listening to God, reading, and he had a question. And he was asking God for the answer about the very event prophesied to occur in 1844. What was it? Well, Daniel 8:13 records his question. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto the certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily? God answered. Daniel 8:14, the very next verse. And he said unto me, unto 2,300 what? Days then
Sanctuary be cleansed.
the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Did he tell Daniel when to start counting? No. Daniel agonized over that fact. In Daniel chapter 9, God gives him a starting point. And 2,300 days from the starting point, what happened in history? Nothing. Nothing. Daniel was concerned about this, but God was not talking about days. He was talking about days of atonement. That's what the cleansing took place on the Day of Atonement, amen? So he wasn't needing 2,300 days, he meant 2,300 days of atonement. So, how many days of atonement came each year for the children of Israel? 1 day. So if you have 2,300 days of atonement, how many years do you have automatically? 2,300 years. We don't need Ezekiel 4:6, Numbers 14:34 to go to that day-year principle. Psalm 77:13 says, thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. So we can go to the sanctuary and get the day-year principle. 1 day of atonement equals 1 year. 2,300 days of atonement equals 2,300 years. Now, here's what God showed Daniel. It started in 457 BC. There are 2 concurrent time frames running, and they both begin at 457 BC. The first one is how many weeks? 70 weeks. And who was that for? The Jews. For your people, God said. The Jews. All right? So it ended in AD 34. Now we're not going to get into all the working parts. But I want to ask you to be thinking about this. Why did God give 2 prophecies together? We'll come back to that. So what happened in AD 34 to bring it to an end?
Stoning of Stephen.
The what?
Stoning of Stephen.
Stoning of Stephen. And what was the other one? Gospel going to the Gentile. Who was the man picked? Paul. That's right. Okay? 2 important facts God desires to establish with man through these 2 encounters. From Daniel's day clear down to our day, it has not changed. The 70 weeks. Isaiah 46, 9 and 10. This is the first part that God wants us to know. We're going to look at verses 9 and 10. Remember the former things of old. For I am God and there is what?
None else.
None else. And there is none like me. Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall what? Stand. And I will do what?
All my pleasure.
All my pleasure. Take it to the bank. If I said it, I will do it. So, God was forewarning his people that things happen in time because he either allows them or he instigates them. And all are within his knowledge and under his control. I want to show you a classic example of all things happening that's under his control. I want you to turn with me to Exodus chapter 4. The story of Moses arguing with God. Remember, God told him, go into Pharaoh. Moses says, oh Lord, I'm not eloquent of speech. You know, before you call me, even now, I can't talk to that man. And God replies in verse number 11. And the Lord said to him, who hath made what?
Man's mouth.
Man's mouth. Excuse me, Moses, who made that piece of equipment I'm asking you to use? But he didn't stop there. Or who maketh the what? Dumb. What's their problem or challenge? Can't speak. Or who maketh the deaf? What's their challenge?
And here.
Can't hear. Or who maketh the seeing? What's their problem?
Can't see that they're blind.
Now the seeing, the challenge of seeing people is they want one of everything they see. And then he says, who made the blind? Who made it? Who did he identify as the maker? Himself. So God is telling us that he either allows or he instigates, but he is in full control and knowledge of everything that takes place on planet Earth. I'm glad we serve a God like that. Amen?
Amen.
Now, we come to the 2300 year. It's called 2300 days, but we know it represents years. And in John 13:19, because this prophecy goes through the Christian era, it's not just an Old Testament statement or event. It goes clear down to the end of time. Jesus injects himself into that one. John 13:19. Now I tell you before it comes, that when it is come to pass, you may what? Believe that I am he. That's important because Jesus is seeing that things are going to be happening around his church, and yet they're on earth and the events are in heaven. So he says, I want you to understand, I can tell you now what's going to happen. So when you begin to see it, you will believe me. You see, if you can't see his hand, listen for his voice. He will guide you, and you will hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk here. He wants us to trust. We have to trust. So, he wanted to establish a basis for trust and cooperation based on total belief. When the 70-week prophecy was given, certain things happened in there, but the greater things were coming, the more unbelievable things were coming with the 2,300 years and what was going to happen at the end of that. So it is today with us. Same prophecy. And God's going to say, if you don't believe me, you're not going to believe what's going to happen when 1844 or the end of the 2,300 days arises. Because they're not like anything else. From Here to Forever, that's a book, controversy in condensation form. The passing of the time in 1844 was followed by great trial to those who held the Advent faith. Their only relief was the light which directed their minds to the sanctuary above. As they waited and prayed, they saw that their great high priest had entered upon another work of ministration. Following him by faith, they were led to see also the closing work of the church. They had a clear understanding of the first and second angels' messages and were prepared to receive and give to the world the solemn warning of the third angel of Revelation 14. And we are told, as I shared in Sabbath school this morning, we are told we still don't understand the third angel's message. We don't have it correct. So the church finds itself in the antitypical against type Day of Atonement, based upon 1 Corinthians 10, 1 and 11. And of course, that's where God says, moreover, brethren, I would not that you should be ignorant. How all our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea. Then he says, now, all these things happen unto them for ensamples, or examples, or types, or symbols. And they are written for your learning. Admonition means learning. Those of us upon whom the ends of the world are come. So God is trying to tell us that what's happening is for us here at the end. God was writing a book when the children of Israel were on their way to Canaan land and beyond. His focus was on the end time Christians, those of us upon whom the ends of the world are come. The context was on the people living back then. So what exactly did take place on October 22 in 1844? Revelation 10:6, prophetic time ended. Daniel 7, 9 to 14, transition took place in heaven. We could throw in there Revelation 3, 7, and 8. I've opened a door no man can shut, and I've shut a door no man can open. Revelation 14, 6 and 7, and 2 Timothy 4, 1, judgment began. Daniel 7, 10, the 4 books of judgment were opened. Matthew 24, 37 to 39, the spirit of prophecy was given to his end-time true church. And I love that. I love that, God, because as I have grown up, I've heard so much caution about using the little red books. We don't have to worry. That is part of the gift to God's end-time true church. Revelation 14:8, Babylon begins to fall. Revelation 10:10, the great disappointment of October 22 took place. What does Revelation 10:10 tell us? And verse 11.
Please do
That they took a little book and ate it up. In their mouth it was sweet as honey, but in their belly it was what?
Peter.
Bitter. What was the book? Daniel. What was the portion of Daniel? Daniel 8:14. What were they looking for to happen? Jesus to return. Did he return? No. So they were terribly disappointed. But God held his hand over verse 11. Had they read and understood verse 11, you must prophesy, you must speak before many nations, kindred, kings, and people. Had they understood that, there would have been no disappointment because they would have known, well, if we got to speak after this experience, then time could have ended for everything. Angel number 1, Revelation 14:6 and 7. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the what?
Hour of judgment is come.
Hour of his judgment is come. And worship him that made what?
Made heaven.
Heaven and earth, the sea, and the fountains of water. Question. Why did God put a creation clause in his judgment hour message? Why did he need it? What was he trying to prove? Timing. Timing. He wanted us to know that of the false prophets who were showing up on planet Earth, that he would have a true one. One of those prophets, now we had Mary Baker Eddy, Church of Scientology. We had Joseph Smith, the Mormons. And then there was another one that we don't often classify as a prophet, but historians do. And he was given the opposite message from this in the 1840s. And he was saying we all came out of a mud puddle. What was his name?
Charles Darwin.
Charles Darwin. Yeah, I was always glad God gave me Darwin first than my surname, rather than the other way around. So, God says, I'm identifying my true prophet through my judgment hour message. And so, here are the 4 books of judgment. Daniel 7:10. Judgment was set and books, plural, were opened. Revelation 20, verse 12 and 21, verse 27. Book number 1 is the Lamb's Book of Life. That's your passport into heaven. Book number 2, Malachi 3:16, the Book of Remembrance. That's your good deeds. We ought to be spending a whole lot more time trying to fill that book up than the one we do. Book number 3, Jeremiah 2:22, is the book of record. And it's interesting what God says. You can wash your deeds with nitric acid, but I can still read it. You're not hiding anything from me. And then book number 4, Psalms 139:16. It's called the Book of Members. Remember earlier on, while the Father and Son were sitting at the table of showbread in heaven, which was the throne of God, then Jesus was writing names in a book. Before the foundation of the earth, your name, your birth date, and all the equipment you came into this earth with were written in this book. So, in judgment, God takes the book of members and he says, this is what I gave Whitman, and these books are going to tell me what he did with it. And that's what judgment is about. Second Timothy 4:1. I charge thee therefore before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall judge the quick, meaning the living, and the dead at his appearing and his kingdom. So when did that happen? His appearing and his kingdom. When did Jesus appear before his Father? On October 22, 1844. Daniel 7, verses 9 and 10. The 103 million angels came in, picked up the Father, took him into the most holy place, came back and picked up Jesus and carried him in, and he appeared before his Father. And then what did he receive at that point? His kingdom. His kingdom. Daniel 7, 13 and 14. I saw in the night vision, and behold, one like unto the Son of Man, came with the clouds of heaven, the angels, and came to the Ancient of Days, the Father. And they, the angels, brought him, Jesus, near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom. So we know that that's talking about October 22, 1844. Matthew 24, 37. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. A global cataclysmic event, we call it the flood, was prophesied by a man named Enoch. How did Enoch prophesy about the flood? Genesis 5:21. And Enoch lived 65 years and began who? Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God did what?
Took him.
Took him. What an experience. Walked out of his house, walked down the street, and never went back home. Enoch is the prophet. What were the words of his prophecy? Have you ever read it? The words of his prophecy. There were no words of his prophecy. There was a word. One word. Methuselah. The name of his son. And the meaning of that name is explained. Enoch was given a prophecy by God that as long as his son was alive, the judgment of the flood would be withheld. But as soon as he died, the flood would be sent forth. Enoch named his son to reflect this prophecy. Thus, the name Methuselah signifies his death shall bring. And indeed, in the year that Methuselah died, the flood came. God says you can count on my word. Take it to the bank. And Matthew said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So we are told, we're told, that at his appearing in his kingdom, Jesus was going to judge the living and the dead. Count on it. And Daniel 7, 13 and 14 affirm he did come in 1844. And there it's again, it's telling us how he came. The angels on him before the Father. All that to say this, that in 1844, when Christ came to his Father in the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, that God gave his end-time church the gift of prophecy. And by the heavenly test of 1 Corinthians 14, 32 and 33, he was revealing the validity of Ellen G. White as his spokesperson or prophet, as they are called. What does Paul tell us in 1 Corinthians 14, 32 and 33? As the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets, for God is not the author of confusion. The spirits of the prophets, we're going to break it down a little bit. The second prophet or following prophets are subject to the first prophet, giving the original prophecy from God. The first one gives the original. The first one gives the prophecy and the time frame. And then the next one that comes along must follow him. They must harmonize on content and the action it called for. Meaning, the second prophet, if a true prophet, will agree with the first prophet and then prepare the people to go through the event. As with Enoch, he gave a prophecy. Moses was the next one to come along. Did he agree with Enoch? Sure he did. Did he do anything with his people? Sure he did. And this is affirmed also by Isaiah. Isaiah 8:20. It's a rather familiar passage. To the law and to the testimony of the first prophet. If they, the second prophet or spokesperson, don't confuse that prophet with somebody who has to be foretelling things. Now, there's spokespersons. If they, the second prophet, speak not according to this word of the first one, it's because of what?
There's no light in them.
No light. No light. Daniel was the first prophet. He gave a 2,300-year prophecy concerning the cleansing of the sanctuary. And he's not talking about one on earth, because there hadn't been one for centuries. The recording or reasoning of Hebrews 9:24 affirms that there had not been one. It says, for Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are a true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. So it's not talking about earthly temples. Among the many false prophets appearing, God raises up a prophet who meets all the tests. These tests are called epochs, biblical epochs, where a prophet gives a prophecy and the second one or the next one that comes along, if true, they will agree with the first prophet and take the people through the event. Ellen G. White, and agreeing with Daniel, states in the Great Controversy, page 417, the question, what is the sanctuary, is clearly answered in the scriptures. The term sanctuary, as used in the Bible, refers first to the tabernacle built by Moses as a pattern of the heavenly things, and secondly, to the true tabernacle in heaven, to which the sanctuary pointed. At the death of Christ, this typical service ended. The true tabernacle in heaven is the sanctuary of the new covenant. And as the prophecy of Daniel 8:14 is fulfilled in this dispensation. The sanctuary to which it refers must be the sanctuary of the new covenant. At the termination of the 2300 days in 1844, there had been no sanctuary on earth for centuries. Thus, the prophecy, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed, unquestionably points to the sanctuary in heaven. Ellen G. White received more than 2,000 prophetic visions and dreams. She wrote over 50 books, and she lectured to thousands on 3 continents. This remarkable woman, though almost entirely self-educated, what was her formal education level?
3rd grade.
3rd grade, because of an incident, not because she was mentally limited. So, almost entirely self-educated, has written and published more books in more languages, which circulate to the greater extent than any other woman in history.
Amen.
Why do we need to hide her? Why do we need to hide her counsel? Writing 200 tracts and pamphlets, 5,000 articles for periodicals, 6,000 typewritten letters and manuscripts, diaries and journals, totaling 100,000 pages in her 70 years of ministry. And now they're recorded digitally. Remarkable lady. Wikipedia, encyclopedia. Listen to what they say about her. Ellen Gould White Harmon was an American Christian leader whose prophetic ministry was instrumental in founding the Sabbatarian Adventist movement that led to the rise of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Her prophetic gift is still being used to what?
God's kingdom.
It's exactly the way God wants it. To prepare a remnant to go through to God's kingdom. And so Daniel's account of the events of October 22, 1844, is affirmed by Ellen White. Selected Messages, Volume 1, page 125. In 1844, our great high priest entered the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary to begin the work of the investigative judgment. The cases of the righteous dead have been passing in review before God. When that work shall be completed, judgment is to be pronounced upon the living. We are individually to be judged according to the deeds done in the body. And the final irrevocable decision is to be pronounced upon every case. And so her writings affirm the message from heaven, recorded in Revelation 12:17 and 19:10, that God's true people possess the spirit of prophecy. The remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the what?
Testimony of Jesus.
Testimony of Jesus Christ. For the testimony of Jesus is the what?
The spirit of prophecy.
Spirit of prophecy. Amen and amen. So now we're going to move down through the events of October 22, 1844 and following. 3 apocalyptic angels begin with their global flight. Angel number 1. By the way, does anyone know the names of these 3 angels? No one knows the names? They're recorded. No one knows. Pastor, would you do me a favor? Would you mind to stand up and just shout out your name? Leonard. Justin. That's the name of the first angel. And the name of the second angel. And the name of the third angel. And the name of the fourth angel. It's us. We are the angels. And don't forget it. We are the ones. Okay, I just threw that in extra. Thank you. I didn't mean to embarrass you. The first angel comes with a message about time. About time. Revelation 14:6-7. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, fear God, Lord, to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. That was between 1843 and 1844. The first two angels actually began casting their voices in 1843. And then they go with crescendo. And then angel number 3 comes and joins them. And it keeps building. It isn't one angel comes, speaks, and quits, and the second one comes and he quits. No, they all are in harmony. Revelation 14:7, saying with a loud voice, fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth, the sea, and the fountains of water. God's affirmation of the timing and the true prophet. Let's go back to First Selected Messages 125. In 1844, a great high priest entered the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary to begin the work of the investigative judgment. The cases of the righteous dead have been passing in review before God. When that work shall be completed, judgment is to be pronounced upon the living. Each of us has a case pending in the court of heaven. We are individually to be judged according to the deeds done in the body. We are fast approaching the close of our probation. Let every soul inquire, how do I stand before God? We know not how soon our names may be taken into the lips of Christ, and our cases be finally decided. What will these decisions be? Shall we be counted with the righteous, or shall we be numbered with the wicked? Judgment is going on right now. Listen, all around us, souls are going down to ruin, as hopeless, as terrible as that which befell Sodom. Every day the probation of some is closing. Every hour, some are passing beyond the reach of mercy. It's going on right now. 1 Peter 4:17-18 tell us where it all begins. Where do you think? For the time has come that judgment must begin where? At the house of God. Where is the house of God? We're in it. So it's talking about us. And if it first began at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of God? And if the righteous scarcely be saved, where shall the ungodly and the sinner appear? Testimonies to the Church, Volume 5, page 81. The time is not far distant when the test will come to every soul. How many? Every soul. All who assume the ornaments of the sanctuary, but are not clothed with Christ's righteousness, will appear in the shame of their own nakedness. Continuing on. We individually have a case pending in the court of heaven. Character is being weighed in the what? Balances of the sanctuary. That's where our judgment is taking place. That's why it is so critical to understand the sanctuary, because every article is a scale. And that's why Satan makes such a direct attack on silencing or misappropriating the sanctuary message. God's claim is placed in one scale, and man's character in the other. And by the balances of the heavenly sanctuary, every man's doom is fixed for eternity. So 1 Peter 4:17 tells us judgment began at the house of God, meaning the church. So it also is weighed in the balances of the sanctuary. Last day events, page 59. In the balances of the sanctuary, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is to be weighed. She will be judged by the privileges and advantages that she had. If her spiritual experience does not correspond to the advantages that Christ, at infinite cost, has bestowed on her, if the blessings conferred have not qualified her to do the work entrusted to her, on her, the church, will be pronounced the sentence, found wanting. By the light bestowed, the opportunities given, will she be judged. Volume 5, Testimonies. At such a time as this, just as the great work of what?
Judging.
Judging who?
The living.
The living is to what? Begin. This was written in 1889 to 1892. Just as the great work of judging the living is to begin, shall we allow unsanctified ambition to take possession of the heart? What can be of any worth to us now except to be found loyal and true to the God of heaven? What is there of any real value in this world when we are on the very borders of the eternal world? What education can we give to the students in our schools that is so necessary as the knowledge of what saith Scripture? Before any can enter the mansions of the blessed, their cases must be investigated, and their characters and their deeds must pass in review before God. All are to be judged according to the things written in the books and to be rewarded as their works have been. Now follow this. This judgment does not take place when? At death. That is a myth. So many Christians of all denominations hang on to. Well, when I die, it's over, my judgment will take place. If you die now, your judgment has already taken place. It doesn't go from the dead to the living, back to the dead, back to the living. Two phases. The dead is past. We are in the living. And God is judging each soul. And if they do pass away, if they are killed in an accident, if they are found missing, as this young couple down in a foreign country went on a safari, and now they can't find them, God has already judged. If they are in the church, the judgment begins at the house of God. The judgment of the wicked is a totally different affair. Angel number 2, with a message about truth. 2 Peter 1:12. Wherefore I will not be negligent to put you always in remembrance of these things, though you know them, and be established in the present truth. What is present truth? God told us. He was talking about one of our leaders, and he said the sanctuary message is present truth. In a grain field on this property up in Clifton Springs, New York, when you read about Port Gibson. Port Gibson is down the road from Clifton Springs, but the address of the Hiram Edson farm is Clifton Springs. God used a humble farmer to begin the fall of Babylon by being shown into heaven and learning present truth. Hiram Edson was shown into the heavenly sanctuary, and he saw the events of October 22 unfold, along with their meaning, causing a whole system of truths to unfold. I want you to get the picture correct here. God said the hour of his judgment is come. Could God, in good conscience, judge a person who had no knowledge of truth? Could he do it? No, he's not that kind of God. So he has to teach. That's why it began with the righteous dead. They're not going to change. They're not going to learn, and they're not going to unlearn. They're settled in. But when it went to the living had to have knowledge of present truth, or he couldn't judge them. And so, during the 1810 years between AD 34 and 1844, about every 100 years, a new doctrine was brought forth by the reformers. But it was not enough to judge anybody. And so God says, I've got to speed the process up. And so he took Hiram Edson into the heavenly sanctuary, and he showed him a whole system of truths. When Hiram came back to earth, whether he was physically or just spiritually, mentally, doesn't matter. God was speaking to him and showing him things. Came back, the first 5 doctrines of our church were brought forth immediately. And the others followed very quickly because they began to study. It was a whole system. Now, when the system got out, Babylon began to fall faster, and the people could be judged at this point. Are you following? If you don't know anything, how are you going to be judged? Today, they are referred to as biblical doctrines or testing truths, with the first 5 called the 5 S's to be given immediately. They rest, the rest of them a short time later. Here we read, the subject of the sanctuary was the key which unlocked the mystery of the disappointment of 1844. It opened to view a complete system of truth, connected and harmonious, showing that God's hand had directed the great Advent movement and revealing present duty as it brought to light the position and work of his people. Light from the sanctuary illuminated the past, the present, and the future. They knew that God had led them by his unerring providence. Angel number 3, with a message about a test. Joshua 24:15. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we're going to do what? Serve the Lord. Revelation 14:9-12 is a contrast study. And the third angel followed them with a loud voice. If any man worship the beast in his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast in his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Now here's the contrast. Verse 12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Selected Messages, Volume 1, page 362. The time of test is just upon us, for the loud cry of the third angel has already begun in the revelation of the righteousness of Christ, the sin-pardoning Redeemer. This is the beginning of the great light of the angel whose glory shall fill the whole earth. Which angel is that? Number 4. Angel number 4. And the earth is lightened with his glory. We read there in Revelation 18:1. So it goes from 1 and 2 to 3, and then 3 blends in with 4. Fourth angel. We want to keep close to the truth that is for our time, present truth. We want to know what is the truth now. We claim to believe the third angel's message. We claim that the angel was flying through the midst of heaven, proclaiming the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. This was the proclamation. Did you hear his voice? When the position of Christ changed from the holy to the most holy place in the sanctuary, it is by faith we are to enter with him, understand his work, and then to present to the world the last message of mercy that is to be given to the world. Sermons and Talks, page 67. And what is it? It is a message to prepare people for the second coming of the Son of Man. It is God's great day of preparation, and therefore every minister of Jesus Christ should have in his course of action, in the burden of his labor, zeal and living interest, and intensity in his efforts, which is appropriate to the truth for this time, which is claimed to be the last message of mercy for our world. Here's the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. But keep what commandments? The what? The 10 Commandments, right? Is that all? No. No. Transgression of the physical law is transgression of the moral law. For God is as truly the author of the physical laws as he is the author of the moral law. His law is written with his own finger upon every nerve, every muscle, every faculty which has been entrusted to man. And every misuse of any part of our organism is a violation of that law. Christ Object Lesson 347. Keep the faith of Jesus. What is the faith of Jesus? Does anybody know? What is it? No idea? Hebrews 7:25. This is Scripture's description of the faith of Jesus. Wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost, that come unto God by him, seeing he ever liveth to make intercession for them. Now let's read it in Third Selected Messages 172. The faith of Jesus, it is talked of, but not understood. What constitutes the faith of Jesus that belongs to the third angel's message? Jesus becoming our sin bearer, that he might become our sin pardoning Savior. He was treated as we deserve to be treated. He came to our world and took our sins that we might take his righteousness. And faith in the ability of Christ to save us amply and fully and entirely is the faith of Jesus. The first angel points us to the sanctuary, the most holy place, the Ark of the Covenant, the law of God. The hour of his judgment is come. Angel number 2 comes along, and he points us to the holy place, where falsehood is coming from. Satan, remember in our early meetings, Isaiah 14, 12 to 14, 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 and 4, verse 7. Satan is bringing falsehood. Babylon is falsehood and confusion. And so in the holy place, we find truth. And then the third angel points us to our great high priest, Jesus Christ. The three angels' messages are the exact same messages as the sanctuary. And God does not divorce them. And he does not want us to divorce them. Let's read it in John 10. I like to read backwards, so I'm going to do that. You can follow. John 10. We're going to begin with verse 9. And in verse 9, Jesus says, I am the what?
The door.
The door. Okay, that's good enough for the moment. Now I'll go back to 7. Then said Jesus unto them again, Verily, verily, I say unto you, I am what now?
The door of the sheep.
The door of the sheep. First he's the door. Now he's the door of the sheep. Now go back to verse 1. And let's see what we can find out there. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the what? Door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way over this 9-foot high fence. The same is a what?
A thief.
And a robber. A thief and a robber. Are you following? Jesus is trying to tell us that when we are ministering to others, do people want to know more information, or do they primarily want to know how to have peace of mind, relief from guilt? What do you think is the greatest desire of people coming to a church? It's always, I want to have peace. I want to have order in my life. So what do? We stand in front of them and we tell them, you've been keeping the wrong day. Oh, no. I mean, I got all these other problems, and now they're adding one more. And we load them, and load them, and load them with guilt. Jesus says, you're robbing and stealing. Jesus said in John 12:32, and I, if I be what? Lifted up, will do what? Draw men unto what? Information or reformation and restoration. So he wants us to do things his way. And it is to not divorce the sanctuary from the three angels' messages. Because there's help in this hope. I then saw the third angel, said my accompanying angel, fearful is his work, awful is his mission. He is the angel that is to select the wheat from the tares and seal or bind the wheat for the heavenly garner. These things should engross the whole mind, the whole attention. Early writings 118. The third angel does what? He brings the shaking into the church. Is he bringing shaking to the dead or the living? The living. And he is already at work. Affirmation. We are in the judgment of the living. Today, he was here. He was in every church. And bringing about the shaking. Testimonies, Volume 5. At such a time as this, just as the great work of judging the living is about to begin, shall we allow unsanctified ambition to take possession of the heart. When the third angel's message closes, mercy no longer pleads for the guilty inhabitants of the earth. The people of God have accomplished their work. They have received the latter rain, the refreshing from the presence of the Lord, and they are prepared for the trying hour before them. Angels are hastening to and fro in heaven. An angel returning from the earth announces that his work is done. The final test has been brought upon the world, and all who have proved themselves loyal to the divine precepts have received the seal of the living God. And Jesus ceases his intercession in the sanctuary above. We're close to that. Very close. These meetings your pastor is planning, critically important. Time is not in our favor. It needs to be supported and it needs to be worked with. You need to get as many people who are in burning buildings and get them out, bring them to where the help is. Now, those who are sealed, let me just give you a little thumbnail sketch. Judgment begins with the house of God first. So it ends with the house of God first. Now, those who are judged and sealed, they are the ones that are going to make up the fourth angel of Revelation 18. They are going to lighten the earth with their glory. They are going to reflect Jesus to the world. And that's why we read this. Servants of God with their faces lighted up, shining with holy consecration, will hasten from place to place to proclaim the message from heaven. By thousands of voices all over the earth, the warning will be given. Thus, the inhabitants of the earth will be brought to take their stand. Between the close of probation for this church and the close of probation for the world, there is a short period of time for those who have never had the opportunity or never rejected truth to accept it or reject it. That's their test time. The time of God's destructive judgments is the time of mercy for those who have no opportunity to learn what is true. Tenderly will the Lord look upon them. His heart of mercy is touched. His hand is still stretched out to save. While the door is closed to those who would not enter, large numbers will be admitted who in these last days hear the truth for the first time. Then, once they have made their decision, everything closes. Probation closes. When the third angel's message closes, mercy no longer pleads for the guilty inhabitants of the earth. Angels are hastening to and fro in heaven. An angel returning from the earth announces that his work is done. Then Jesus ceases his intercession in the sanctuary room. He lifts his hands and with a loud voice says, "It is done." And all the angelic hosts lay off their crowns as he makes the solemn announcement. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. He which is filthy, let him be filthy still. And he that is righteous, let him be righteous still. And he that is holy, let him be holy still. Revelation 22:11. Every case has been decided for life or death. Christ has made the atonement for his people and blotted out their sins. The number of his subjects is made up. The kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven is about to be given to the heirs of salvation. And Jesus is to reign as King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
Amen.
And then the response of those who are saved. Isaiah 25:9. And it shall be said in that day, "Lo, this is our God. We have waited for him and he will save us." This is the Lord. We have waited for him and we will be glad and rejoice in his salvation. God is calling each one of us. He wants